Who is the lady in the red dress?
She is.
The room was full of people who knew his name. Chandeliers. Crystal glasses. Laughter that cost money. And Nicole stood there in a dress she had bought for him. Deep burgundy off-shoulder, the kind of dress a woman wears when she finally believes she belongs somewhere, watching his mouth move. Watching him answer the question his colleague had just asked. The question was simple. 4 words. Who is she though? And Taeyong Seo, the man who had kissed her like she was oxygen, the man who had traced her face in the dark and whispered things that had no business being lies. That man smiled. Smooth. Unbothered. And said, nobody important. She works in the lab. The glass in Nicole's hand didn't shatter. Her voice didn't crack. Nothing on her face moved. But something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes just before a woman decides she is done. What he didn't know, what nobody in that glittering room knew, was that she was carrying his child. And by morning she would be gone. Welcome to Seoul and Afro Storytime. On today's episode you'd get a dose of betrayal, power, romance, love, unexpected encounters and beautiful beginning. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification icon to get a reminder when new amazing stories drop, and send this story to friends and family who you think would love to watch it. And also tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now let's dive back into this amazing story. Nicole Adjemang was not supposed to be extraordinary. That was the first thing people always got wrong about her. She was born in Kumasi, Ghana, in a house where the roof argued with the rain every single night and her mother's sewing machine never, not once, stopped humming. Her mother Abina could take 3 yards of Kent fabric and a broken zipper and produce something that made brides weep with gratitude. Her father Emmanuel taught mathematics, loved quietly, and died of a stroke at 52, 3 months before Nicole's university acceptance letter arrived. She read it at his graveside. She promised him she would go. She went. 7 years later. 1 master's degree, 1 fully funded fellowship and 1 economy class flight later. Nicole landed in Seoul. 29 years old. Focused like a blade. She had her mother's discipline, her father's mind, and 0 interest in anything that wasn't her research. Seoul hit her like a beautiful fist. Always gleaming. Always moving like it was late for something important. He loved it. The city expected excellence without applauding it, and that suited her completely. She was not supposed to meet him. She was not supposed to meet anyone. Taeyong Seo was not just a wealthy man's son playing at business. At 34 he had already tripled his family's pharmaceutical empire across 12 countries. He was the kind of man that rooms rearranged themselves for, quietly, automatically, the way flowers turn toward heat without deciding to. He walked into her research lab on a Thursday in October because he took a wrong turn from a boardroom meeting. Simple as that. Wrong turn. Right disaster. Nicole didn't look up when the door opened. She was deep inside a data readout, chasing a variable that kept slipping away, her natural hair pinned loosely, her lab coat slightly too big, her focus absolute. That's the Yoon Park protein sequencing trial, he said. She looked up. He was reading her screen. 3 feet away. Dark suit. Dark eyes. The kind of stillness that meant he was always thinking more than he said. You're reading my screen, she said. You left it visible. This is a secured lab. And yet. He almost smiled. He straightened slowly. Can I help you find somewhere else to be? That almost smile deepened. Like she had surprised him. Like that didn't happen often. Taeyong Seo, he offered. I know. Your name is on the building. She turned back to her screen. And you are interrupting my work. He stood there, she counted, 4 full seconds. Then he left. That should have been nothing. A footnote. 2 people from different galaxies briefly occupying the same room. Except he came back the following Thursday. And the one after. And the one after that. Each time with a sharper question about her research. Each time staying a little longer. Each time leaving something unnamed but electric in the air between them. On his 7th visit he brought 2 coffees. Set one beside her without asking. Said nothing about it. She drank it. She didn't thank him. But she smiled at her screen after he left and pressed 2 fingers to her lips like she was keeping something in. And that was it. That was the moment Nicole Adjemang, the woman who had survived every hard thing life handed her through sheer disciplined focus, made the single most reckless decision of her entire life. She let him in. Not loudly. Not all at once. The way you let something dangerous in when you've convinced yourself you're strong enough to manage it. Slowly. Then suddenly. The way all the worst and most beautiful things happen. It started with Thursdays. That was their unofficial language before they had any language at all. He would appear at the lab door, always around 4 p.m., always with 2 coffees, always with a question about her research that was just intelligent enough to make her suspicious. No man who ran a 12-country pharmaceutical empire needed to personally visit a mid-level research lab every week. She knew that. He knew she knew that. Neither of them said anything about it. What she noticed first was that he listened differently from other men. Most men in powerful rooms listened to respond, already forming their next sentence while you were still finishing yours. Tiang listened like he was collecting something. Like your words were data points he intended to keep. When Nicole spoke about her research, about the protein sequencing anomaly she had been chasing for months, his eyes didn't glaze the way people's eyes glazed when science got specific. He leaned in. He asked follow-up questions that proved he had retained everything from the week before. That was the first dangerous thing. Being truly heard by someone who had no obligation to hear you. The second dangerous thing was the night of the blackout. It was a Tuesday in December, not a Thursday, which already meant something had shifted. A citywide power outage hit Seoul just after 7 p.m. Nicole was still in the lab, alone, her data unsaved, her laptop dying, her phone at 4%. She was standing in the sudden dark, muttering a very specific Ghanaian curse under her breath when the door opened and a flashlight cut across the room. Still here, Tiang said. Not a question. Pi data. Backup generator kicks in on the 3rd floor in about 6 minutes. Your files are fine. He crossed the room like he knew it. Set a second flashlight on her desk. I was in the building for a board call. At 7 p.m. I work late. So do I. I know, he said quietly. And the way he said it, like he had been paying attention to her hours, like he had noticed, made something shift in the room that had nothing to do with the power cut. They sat in the near dark for those 6 minutes. Not speaking. The city outside the window was a scattered puzzle of emergency lights and shadows. Seoul looked almost soft like that. Almost gentle. Nicole sat on her lab stool and Taeyong leaned against the wall beside her, and they watched the dark city breathe together, and something passed between them that neither of them was brave enough to name yet. The lights came back. She saved her files. He straightened his jacket. Have you eaten? He asked. That's not. It's a simple question, Nicole. It was the first time he used her name. Just her first name, no title, no formal distance. It landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. She hadn't eaten. They both knew it. He took her to a small jiggy restaurant 3 blocks from the lab. Nothing like the places a man of his profile should have been seen in. Scratched wooden tables. Banchan in mismatched bowls. The kind of place where the food was extraordinary precisely because nobody was performing anything. They sat across from each other, and for the first time since October, neither of them hid behind her research as the reason for the conversation. He asked about Kumasi. She asked about the pressure of inheriting an empire. He told her that his father had handed him the company like a sentence. Not a gift, a sentence. She told him about reading her university letter at her father's grave. He went quiet for a long moment after that. Then he said, he would have been proud of where you are. Simple. Direct. No fuss around it. She looked at her soup so he wouldn't see what his words did to her face. They walked back separately. Obviously. Carefully. The way people walk when they are trying to make something look like nothing. But it was already something. By February it was undeniable. He was texting her at midnight. Not romantic texts, not yet, just articles he thought she'd find interesting, questions about her data. A voice note once where he was clearly driving and just wanted to think out loud about something she'd said 3 days earlier. She started sleeping with her phone face up. She started wearing her good earrings to the lab on Thursdays. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself this with great conviction and absolutely zero success. The first time he touched her was an accident. Or it began as one. She was reaching for a file on the upper shelf. She was tall, but the shelf was taller. And he was suddenly behind her, reaching past her, his chest a warm wall against her back, his arm brushing hers as he retrieved the file easily and set it in her hands. He didn't step back immediately. She didn't ask him to. For 3 full seconds they just stood there, her heart doing something completely unprofessional, his breathing slightly different from what it had been before. "Got it," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved. Then his phone rang. He stepped back. Answered it in clipped Korean, his voice immediately shifting into the register of a man who ran things. She turned back to her desk. Her hands weren't entirely steady. That night he texted her one line. No preamble. No context. Just, "I think about you more than I should." She stared at it for 40 minutes. Then she typed back, "So do I." And just like that, with 12 words between two people who should have known better, everything changed. The wall came down. Not with drama. Not with a grand declaration. Just two people telling the truth in the dark and deciding, quietly, to stop pretending they weren't already falling. What neither of them knew yet was how much that fall was going to cost her. Love, when it finally arrived between them, was nothing like Nicole had imagined it would be with a man like Taeyong-seo. She had imagined grand gestures. Expensive restaurants. The performative romance of a powerful man trying to impress a woman. What she got instead was infinitely more dangerous. He got the private version of him. The one nobody bought tickets to see. He cooked for her. That was the first shock. Not restaurant reservations, actual cooking. He had a penthouse apartment on the 47th floor of a building in Gangnam that looked like it had been designed by someone who worshipped clean lines and floor-to-ceiling glass. The first time she saw it, she stood at the window and looked at Seoul spread below her like a lit circuit board and felt something she couldn't immediately name. He came to stand beside her with 2 glasses of wine and said, "The city looks less aggressive from up here." She laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised her, and he looked at her laugh like he was memorizing it. He made her jollof rice once. It was terrible. Spectacularly, bravely terrible. He had watched 3 YouTube tutorials and still managed to produce something that tasted like confusion. She stood in his architectural kitchen laughing so hard she had to hold the counter, and he stood there with a wooden spoon looking genuinely offended, and somehow that terrible rice, that brave, disastrous attempt, undid her more completely than anything expensive ever could have. "My mother's recipe is better," she managed between laughs. "Send it to me," he said seriously. She did. He practiced. He got better. That detail, a man of his power quietly practicing a recipe because it mattered to her, was the detail that broke the last careful wall she had kept around her heart. She stopped counting the walls after that. There was no point. Their relationship existed in 2 registers, and she understood that early. There was the private register. His apartment, her lab after hours, long drives through Seoul at night when he wasn't Taeyong-seo the Empire heir but just a man who held her hand across the gear shift and asked her questions about her childhood that nobody had ever thought to ask before. In the private register she was fully seen. Fully wanted. He said her name like it meant something specific to him. He traced the curve of her jaw in the dark like he was learning it by heart. And then there was the public register. Which was silence. She told herself it was practical. He was a CEO. His family's empire ran on reputation and alliance and the very particular architecture of Korean chaebols where who you were seen with was a business decision as much as a personal one. She understood this. She was an intelligent woman. She did not make scenes. She did not demand what she had not been offered. But the absence had a weight. She felt it at the university events where she saw him across rooms and they exchanged nothing. Not a glance, not a nod, nothing. She felt it when his colleague Dr. Park asked her once, casually, if she had met the CEO heir yet, and she said evenly that she had spoken to him briefly about funding. She felt it most on the mornings she left his apartment before dawn because staying until daylight felt like a boundary neither of them had discussed but both of them observed. He felt it. She filed it. She did not speak it. Because in the private register he was so completely, overwhelmingly present that the public silence felt like a separate problem she could solve later. He was attentive in the way that made you feel like the most important room in a building full of important rooms. He remembered everything. Her coffee order, her research frustrations, the name of her mother's cat, the specific way she got quiet when she was bothered and hadn't decided to talk about it yet. "You're doing the thing," he said one night. They were on his couch, Seoul glittering beyond the glass, her legs across his lap, a half-finished drama playing on the television that neither of them was watching. "What thing?" she said. "The quiet thing. Something's bothering you." She looked at him. He was already looking at her with that particular focused stillness of his. Not pushing, not performing concern, just genuinely present and waiting. She almost said it. Almost said, I want to exist in your life in the daytime too. I want to be something you claim. She had the words lined up. She could feel them at the back of her throat. Instead she said, I'm fine. Just tired. He studied her face for a moment longer than comfortable. Then he pulled her closer, pressed his lips to her temple and said quietly, tell me when you're ready. He never did. And here is where the story shifts. Here is where something that had been a low hum beneath everything suddenly became impossible to ignore. She was 6 weeks late before she let herself count. 8 weeks before she bought the test. She sat on the floor of her lab bathroom at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday with the result in her hand and the world rearranging itself around her in real time. One line became two. 2 lines became a question she had no framework for. She pressed her back against the cold wall and breathed and thought about her father and thought about her mother's sewing machine and thought about a man on the 47th floor who had never once said her name in public. She didn't tell him that night. He needed to think. She needed to decide what kind of woman she was going to be about this. She needed, most urgently, to figure out whether the love she had built her last 14 months around was real enough to hold what was coming. 3 days later came the dinner party. 3 days later she had her answer. Before we get to that dinner, drop a comment right now. Do you think Nicole should have spoken up sooner? Or was she right to wait? Tell me in the comments and tell me which city you're watching from, because this next part? You are not ready. The invitation came through the lab's official channel. A formal dinner hosted by Seoul Pharmaceuticals to celebrate the successful completion of the Yoon Park trial. The very research Nicole had spent 18 months bleeding over. Her name was on the program. Her findings were the centerpiece of the evening. She had every right to be there. More right than almost anyone in that room. She wore burgundy. Deep, unapologetic burgundy, off-shoulder, the kind of dress that didn't ask for permission. She did her hair in a careful updo that showed the line of her neck and the gold earrings her mother had sent from Kumasi for her last birthday. She looked in the mirror before leaving her apartment and told herself the flutter in her stomach was excitement. She was being honored tonight. Her work was being celebrated. That was what tonight was. He almost believed it. Taeyong was already there when she arrived. She saw him across the room immediately. She always found him immediately in any space, the way you find the thing your eye has been trained to locate. He was in a dark navy suit, surrounded by a constellation of executives and board members, laughing at something someone had said with the relaxed authority of a man completely in his element. He looked extraordinary. He looked like every inch of the empire he had been born into. He didn't look at her when she walked in. She told herself that meant nothing. They were careful in public. That was the arrangement. Unspoken, observed, mutual. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray, smiled at a colleague from the research division, and settled into the evening with the practiced composure of a woman who had learned very early that she could not afford to look uncertain in rooms that were already skeptical of her presence. The dinner was long and glittering and full of speeches. Her research director gave a presentation that featured her findings prominently and mentioned her name twice to generous applause. She smiled. She nodded. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach beneath the table. A private gesture, unconscious, the way you reach for something you're still deciding how to protect. Taeyong spoke after dinner. He was a precise and compelling speaker. No wasted words, no performance, just clean authority delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that made rooms lean forward. He thanked the research team. He outlined the trial's implications for the company's next phase. He was impressive and she watched him with the complicated pride of a woman who knew the private version of a man the world only got the public version of. He still hadn't looked at her. Not once. Not a glance. Not the small private acknowledgement they had developed over months. A certain stillness of the eye, a fractional tilt of the head, something only she would catch. Nothing. She was a ghost in a burgundy dress at a dinner celebrating her own work. She told herself, one more time with decreasing conviction, that it meant nothing. Then came the moment. After the formal program ended, the room loosened into cocktail hour conversation. Nicole was standing near the window. Seoul spread below, same city, same lights, but everything feeling different tonight, when Taeyong's colleague approached. His name was Director Choi. Senior board member, old family friend of the CEO's. The kind of man who asked questions like he already knew the answers and just wanted to watch you find them. He stopped beside Taeyong. Looked across the room at Nicole. then looked back at Taeyong with the particular expression of a man conducting casual social accounting. The African researcher, Director Choi said. She's the one behind the trial findings, yes? Remarkable work. Do you know her well? The question hung in the air for exactly 1 second. 1 second during which Nicole, standing 15 feet away with a champagne glass she was no longer tasting, went completely still. 1 second during which 14 months of stolen mornings and practiced recipes and whispered things in the dark compressed themselves into a single point of waiting. Taeyong Seo smiled. Easy. Smooth. The smile of a man for whom this was a simple social transaction. Not really, he said. She works in the lab. Good researcher. Director Choi nodded, satisfied, and moved on to the next conversation. Taeyong's eyes finally found Nicole across the room. She was already looking at him. For a moment, just one, something moved across his face. Something that might have been panic. Or guilt. Or the specific expression of a man who has just heard himself say something he cannot unsay. His mouth opened slightly like he was forming words across the distance between them. She smiled at him. Slow. Deliberate. The most devastating smile she had ever produced in her life. The kind of smile that says, I see you. I see exactly who you are. And I am done. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface. Fiddly. Without a sound. She picked up her clutch. She walked to the elevator with her shoulders back and her head high and her hand pressed once more, briefly, privately, against her stomach. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. She turned around and for one last second she could see the full room, the chandeliers, the crystal, the empire, and Taeyong Seo standing very still in the middle of it all, watching her go with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It looked, she thought distantly, like a man realizing too late exactly what he was losing. The doors closed. She exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. By the time she reached her apartment she had already made 2 decisions. The first was that she was keeping this baby. The second was that she was leaving Seoul. She booked a flight to Accra. Departure, 6 a.m. She had 4 hours. She started packing. Her phone lit up 17 times that night. Taeyong's name on the screen 17 times. She watched each notification arrive and disappear and arrive again. She did not pick up. Not once. Because there was nothing, not one word in any language, that he could say now that would rebuild what he had flattened in 15 feet in one careless sentence. Some things, once said, become the truest thing a person has ever told you. He works in the lab. Good researcher. She folded her burgundy dress into the suitcase last. He didn't know why. Maybe because it still deserved to go somewhere beautiful. Maybe because she did too. The taxi arrived at 4:45 a.m. Seoul was quiet and dark and still impossibly beautiful. She looked at it through the window the entire drive to the airport. She didn't let herself cry until she was through security. And then she cried, quietly, privately, the way she did everything, for exactly 12 minutes. Then she wiped her face, straightened in her airport seat and put one hand on her stomach. It's just us, she said softly. And we are going to be fine. He believed it. Not completely. But enough. The plane lifted off at 6:04 a.m. Seoul fell away beneath her. And Nicole Ajamang, daughter of Abina and Emmanuel, researcher, woman, mother-to-be, flew toward the rest of her life without looking down. Accra received her the way home always receives a woman who has been through something. Without fanfare, without questions, with just warmth and noise and the smell of red earth after rain that hit her the moment she stepped out of Kotoka International Airport and made her eyes sting in a way that had nothing to do with the humidity. Her mother was waiting at the gate. Abina Ajamang was 58 years old, small and solid, with hands that had sewn 1,000 beautiful things and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at her daughter, the careful posture, the controlled face, the way Nicole was holding herself together with sheer will, and simply opened her arms. No questions. No words. Just arms. Nicole walked into them and came apart completely. She cried the way she hadn't allowed herself to cry at the airport. The deep, cellular kind of crying that isn't about tears but about releasing something that has been lodged too long in a place tears can't reach. Her mother held her and rocked her slightly and said nothing because Abina Ajamang had always understood that some pain needed to be witnessed before it could be explained. Later. Much later, over tea in her mother's small bright kitchen with the sewing machine humming in the next room like nothing had ever changed, Nicole told her everything. All of it. The lab. The Thursdays. The terrible jollof rice. The 14 months of a love that lived only in private. The dinner party. The dress. The 15 feet and one sentence that had ended everything. And finally, quietly with both hands wrapped around her mug, the baby. Abina was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Does he know?" "No." Another silence. "Are you going to tell him?" Nicole looked at the table. "I don't know yet." Her mother nodded slowly. She reached across the table and covered Nicole's hands with hers, those strong, capable, beautiful hands. "Whatever you decide," she said simply, "you are not doing it alone." That was all. No judgment. No lecture. Just a mother closing the distance between what was and what was survivable. Nicole stayed. She transferred her fellowship remotely. She contacted the University of Ghana about a research position that had been quietly offered to her twice before and twice declined. She accepted it this time. She built a life around what was coming. Slowly, methodically, the way she had always built things. With intention. With her mother's hands nearby. With her father's voice in her head saying quietly, "You were made for hard things." She was 5 months pregnant when the first call came from Seoul that wasn't Taeyong. It was his mother. Madame Seo was 71 years old and had the kind of voice that sounded like it had never once asked for anything it didn't fully expect to receive. She had somehow, and Nicole never discovered exactly how, found out about the pregnancy. She called on a Tuesday afternoon. She identified herself calmly. And then she said something that Nicole had not expected from the matriarch of the Seo Empire. She said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of my son. And I would like to meet you." Nicole held the phone very still. "Why?" "Because," Madame Seo said with the particular precision of a woman who chose every word like a careful stitch, "what he did was beneath our family. And because the child you are carrying is a Seo. And because," a pause, "my son has not slept properly in 5 months and I am tired of watching him ruin himself quietly." Nicole said nothing for a long moment. "He should have called himself," she said finally. "Yes," Madame Seo agreed. "Should have. He's afraid you won't answer." "He's right. I know. That's why I called instead." Another pause, softer this time. "He is not a bad man, Nicole. He is a man who made a catastrophic choice in a moment of cowardice and has been paying for it every day since. I am not asking you to forgive him tonight. I am asking you to let him try." The line was quiet. Outside Nicole's window, Accra was doing what Accra always did in the early evening. Alive and loud and completely indifferent to personal crises, which she had always found oddly comforting. She thought about the terrible jollof rice. She thought about 12 words in the dark. "I think about you more than I should. So do I." She thought about a man who had memorized her coffee order in her childhood and the specific way she went quiet when something was wrong. She thought about what it meant that he had seen all of that, all of her, and still chosen the easier thing in a room full of people who mattered to his empire. She thought about her daughter. Because she knew by now it was a daughter. She had known for weeks. She thought about what she wanted her daughter to learn from watching her mother move through the world. Not bitterness. Not armor. But also, not the willingness to be someone's private treasure and public nothing. "Tell him," Nicole said finally, "that if he wants to talk he can come to Accra. On my ground. My terms. And he better come with more than sorry." She heard something that might have been the closest thing Madame Seo had ever produced to a relieved exhale. "I'll tell him," she said. He came. 2 weeks later. He stood at her mother's front door in Kumasi looking like a man who had rehearsed and discarded 100 versions of what he was about to say. He was holding nothing. No flowers. No gifts. Just himself, which was, Nicole would think later, exactly right. You don't bring flowers to a reckoning. You bring yourself and you hope yourself is enough. She opened the door. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had cracked her open and cost her something she could never fully name. He looked back at her with those still dark eyes, and this time there was nothing hidden in them. No careful management. No social calculation. Just a man standing in the consequence of himself, completely exposed, asking without words for the chance to be better than his worst moment. "You have 1 hour," she said. He nodded. "That's fair." She stepped aside and let him in. Not because the hurt was gone. It wasn't. Not because what he did was forgivable in the easy, tidy way people mean when they use that word. but because her daughter deserved a father who had fought his way back to her mother's door. And because Nicole Adjuming had never been a woman who confused self-protection with self-imprisonment. She was her mother's daughter. She knew how to take something broken and make it into something that could still hold its shape. The hour became 2. Then dinner. Then her mother appearing from the kitchen with food and the kind of appraising look that said, "I am watching you, Seo. Do not make me regret this table." It was not a happy ending. Not yet. It was something more honest than that. It was a beginning. Imperfect, cautious, built on the rubble of what had broken, but a beginning nonetheless. And sometimes, for a woman who has already survived the worst of a thing, a beginning is the most powerful thing in the world. Some women leave loudly. They slam doors and make speeches and let the whole world know they are going. But the women who leave quietly, who press one hand to their stomach, set down their glass and walk to the elevator with their shoulders back, those are the women who change the entire story simply by deciding they are worth more than a secret. Nicole knew her worth. It just took one sentence in a room full of chandeliers to remind her. Now tell me, was Taeyong worth a second chance? Or should Nicole have kept that door closed forever? And what would you have done? Walked back in or walked away for good? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story moved you, if you felt even one moment of it in your chest, please like this video, subscribe and share it with someone who understands that the most powerful thing a woman can do is know exactly when to leave. New stories drop every week and you do not want to miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.